Bars are funny places. Not haha funny, but the kind where the drunkest guy thinks he's a stand-up comedian, the loudest guy thinks he owns the place, and the unlucky guy who walks in at the wrong time, he's the punchline. Jason Statham figured that out one night after a long shoot. He wasn't there to fight, wasn't there to flex, just wanted a quiet pint. But the table of wannabe tough guys in the corner, they had other plans. They laughed, they jeered, they tried to make him the evening's joke. And then, one shove, one ripped sleeve, and the whole bar saw the tattoo on his arm. Not some trendy tribal, not a drunken dare. A regiment crest. A mark you earn, not buy. 1 second they were comedians. The next you could have heard the ice melt in their glasses. If you've got a few minutes, I'll tell you exactly how that night went down. It was late, the kind of hour when the bar has already split into two groups. The regulars clinging to their stools like barnacles, and the rowdy crew who came in to make noise. The air was thick with smoke, even though smoking indoors was technically banned. Rules don't mean much in places like this. The jukebox buzzed, coughing out old rock tracks, and the floor was sticky with spilled beer. Jason stepped in quietly. He wasn't dressed for attention, dark shirt, plain jeans, nothing flashy. To most people, he'd look like just another tired man chasing a bit of calm before heading home. But if you've ever walked into a room with confidence that doesn't need to be loud, you know it draws eyes. And sure enough, the table in the corner noticed him right away. 4 guys, mid-30s, the kind of men who looked like they never outgrew the high school locker room. Loud voices, slaps on the back, empty bottles already piling up. They'd been the stars of their own story all night, and now they had a new character to toy with. "Oi lads," one of them barked, pointing his chin toward Jason. Vin Diesel's stunt double just showed up. The table erupted in laughter. It wasn't witty. It wasn't even original. But that's the thing about drunk laughter. It doesn't need to be clever, just loud enough to draw attention. Jason ignored it. He made his way to the bar, ordered a pint, and found a quiet table. His shoulders were heavy from a long day under hot lights, performing take after take until the director finally called it. He wasn't in the mood to spar verbally with a bunch of amateurs. But the table wasn't done. "Where's your camera crew, mate?" another shouted. "Or did they finally realize you can't act?" More laughter. It rolled through the bar like a bad smell, and a few heads turned. Not because it was funny, but because people were curious to see how Jason would react. That's the way it goes in a bar. Conflict is free entertainment. Jason took a slow sip, set his glass down, and stayed silent. That silence is a weapon most people don't know how to use. It unsettles. It makes the joker feel like maybe his punchline wasn't as strong as he thought. But silence also fuels drunks. If they think you're ignoring them, they double down. "Oi, transporter," a third one yelled, pantomiming a steering wheel in his hands. "Gonna drive us all home safe, yeah," the table howled. One of them even clapped so hard he nearly toppled his beer. Jason exhaled, steady, unbothered. He could have said something sharp, something to cut them down with words, but why give them the satisfaction? The bartender, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, slid another beer across the counter and muttered under her breath, "Ignore them, love. They're just looking for a show." And Jason nodded. That's exactly what they wanted. A show. Someone to rise, to bite back, to give them more material. But here's the problem with drunk comedians. If you don't laugh at their jokes, they raise the stakes. The loudest one, broad shoulders, red face, the kind of guy who thought a beer belly was the same as muscle, stood and swaggered toward the bar. He leaned against it, just a little too close to Jason. "You don't say much, do you?" he sneered. "What's the matter, Baldy? Forgot your lines?" Jason glanced at him once, then back at his drink, calm, controlled. The man chuckled and gave Jason a deliberate shove on the shoulder. Not hard enough to start a fight, but just enough to say you're not in control here. And that's when it happened. As the man pulled back, his hand snagged Jason's sleeve. The fabric ripped clean from shoulder to elbow, the sound cutting through the jukebox and laughter like a blade. For a second nobody noticed, and then they saw it. Ink. Bold, deliberate, unmistakable. It wasn't some messy design from a drunken night out. It wasn't flames or skulls or anything flashy. It was a regiment crest, clean lines, sharp edges, a symbol carved into his skin with meaning deeper than any insult. The kind of tattoo you don't buy, you earn. And the silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The man who'd shoved him froze, his hand still half raised, his face pale under the bar's dim light. His friends at the table stopped mid-laugh, their grins curdling into something closer to fear. Even the bartender, who'd seen more bar fights than birthdays, went still. Because everyone knew, you don't mock that mark. You don't laugh at someone who's carried what comes with it. That tattoo didn't just say Jason was strong. It said he'd been tested. It said he'd stood where others broke. It said respect wasn't a request, it was a fact. Jason didn't move, didn't flex, didn't gloat. He just adjusted what was left of his sleeve, raised his glass, and took a slow sip. His calm was louder than any outburst could have been. And the wannabe tough guys, their table was dead quiet now. The comedians had lost their material. The kings of the bar had lost their crown. You could have heard the ice melt in their glasses. That's how it happened. The night Jason Statham walked into a bar, got mocked like a nobody, and turned the whole room silent without saying a word. And that tattoo, that was only the beginning of what made the night unforgettable. Silence is a strange thing in a bar. Normally, there's always noise, laughter, clinking glasses, someone singing too loud along with the jukebox. But when Jason's sleeve ripped and the tattoo came into view, it was like someone had hit a mute button. The man who'd shoved him froze mid-motion. His friends at the corner table sat rigid, the grins wiped clean off their faces. Even the bartender, polishing a glass with her usual air of indifference, stopped mid-wipe. For a long breath, the only sound was the fizz of the beer taps and the low hum of the neon lights. Jason didn't look around. He didn't need to. He lifted his pint, took a sip, and set it down with the same quiet control he'd walked in with. The tattoo sat there on his arm like a sentence written in ink, bold, final, impossible to argue with. A regiment crest. Not flashy, not dramatic, but heavy with meaning. It spoke of loyalty, discipline, and battles fought far away from sticky pub floors and drunken jokes. The wannabe tough guy who'd caused the tear finally found his voice. I didn't mean, he trailed off, his words tripping over themselves. For the first time that night, his buddies didn't laugh. One of them tried to cover the awkwardness with a half-hearted joke. It's just a tattoo, innit, he muttered, but even he didn't believe it. His eyes kept darting from Jason's arm to Jason's face, waiting for some reaction, some release. But Jason gave them nothing, and that nothing was louder than any shout could have been. Across the room, the regulars, men who'd kept their heads down during the mockery, were suddenly watching with a different kind of attention. Respect. Recognition. The bartender set down her glass and leaned on the counter, her expression softened. She'd seen 100 men puff up in bars trying to look harder than they were, but this was different. This was the kind of hardness you couldn't fake. Jason's calm stretched the silence into something unbearable. The table of hecklers shifted uncomfortably, their bravado leaking out of them like air from a punctured tire. Finally, the ringleader, red-faced and sweating now, tried to salvage some dignity. Didn't know you were military, mate, he said, his tone almost apologetic. No harm meant. Jason turned his head just slightly, eyes cutting toward him with that sharp, unblinking look that had made audiences worldwide believe he could take on a dozen men at once. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The man nodded quickly, retreating back to his table. His friends mumbled excuses, muttered about finishing their drinks, but the night was already over for them. The comedians had lost the stage. The kings had been dethroned. Jason lifted his pint again, took another long sip, and let the room breathe again. That's the thing about respect. Sometimes it's not demanded, sometimes it's not asked for, sometimes it's simply there. Written in ink, etched into skin, lived not spoken. The tattoo wasn't just a design. It was a symbol of a life lived with discipline, of battles most people in that bar couldn't even imagine. And in that moment, everyone knew it. The bartender finally broke the silence with a low chuckle. Funny how quiet they get, isn't it? She said. Jason gave the faintest smirk, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but says more than words could. Around him, the bar slowly returned to life. Glasses clinked again, the jukebox wheezed back into focus, and conversations picked up, but softer now, more respectful, like the entire place had just been reminded of something bigger than beer and banter. The hecklers didn't stay long. They drained their glasses quickly, eyes fixed anywhere but on Jason, and shuffled out into the night. For once, no one cheered their exit. No one cared. Jason sat a little longer, finishing his pint. He didn't gloat, didn't bask in the silence he'd created. That wasn't his style. To him, it was simple. You don't need to fight every battle. Sometimes you let the truth speak for itself. And that truth was carved into his arm. By the time he stood to leave, the bartender gave him a nod. Not the kind you give a celebrity, the kind you give someone you respect. Jason nodded back, pulled his jacket over the torn sleeve, and walked out into the night without a word. That night became a story retold in whispers, not because there'd been a fight, not because Jason had thrown a punch or raised his voice, but because he hadn't, because one tattoo, one mark of loyalty and service, had silenced an entire bar. And that's the lesson most people miss. Respect isn't about who yells the loudest, who drinks the most, or who throws the first punch. Real respect comes from what you've done, what you've endured, and what you carry with you, even when you don't show it. Jason carried it quietly, but when the sleeve tore and the ink showed, the whole room saw it. And in that moment they finally understood some marks aren't decoration. They're history, they're weight, they're proof. And once you see them, you don't laugh, you listen.